let's get into Luka Doncic specifically for a few minutes, because I do think this is an interesting year for him from an MVP standpoint, and just from a standpoint of like, all right, like you have a team that can, like, entering a season, this is probably the first time we could say, hey, like, you have a team that could actually potentially win the title here. And this is the first time, obviously, that he's been coming off the finals and that experience. What will it take for him to, one, win MVP? Because it feels like he's been one of the betting favorites for like 5 years or so every single year, and he still hasn't gotten one because that damn Nikola Jokic is pretty good in Denver, you know?
Man, listen. Yes.
But what will it take for Luka to win MVP? And does that matter? Like, is that something that he cares about? Jason Kidd, the Mavs organization, is that something that they even care about?
Luka will tell you he doesn't care about individual awards. I mean, last year, the whole campaign for Pravi MVP, hashtag Pravi MVP, which is supposed to be, I believe, the word real in Slovenian. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong.
I think so, yeah.
That's what it means.
Think so. But don't quote
me. Yes, I believe so. I mean, I should know. Hell, I do cover the damn team. But at the same time, I mean, last year he had, one of the more historic offensive seasons that we have ever seen. I mean, basically going for 34, 9, and 9. We had never seen a season like that before. I mean, he had the most points, rebounds, and assists, combined since the merger. Like, it was a historic year for him, and he helped lead his team to the NBA Finals. So there was a late push to see if he could win last year's MVP, but obviously Nikola Jokic, I mean, his counting numbers, his advanced numbers, I mean, you could go on and on and on. I mean, Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world. But coming into this year, it felt like the narrative was in place. Okay, you had a spectacular offensive year. You led your team to the NBA Finals for the first time. He's been a perennial MVP candidate for years at this point. But coming into the year, it's like, okay, this is the year, especially if the Mavericks find a way to finish, in the top 4, or more likely potentially in the top 2, that this could be the year for him to win the MVP. But unfortunately, he suffered a calf injury that, right before training camp, began, that kind of slowed him down at the beginning of the year, got out to a slow start once he came back. One of the things that unfortunately we continue to talk about with him at times is the conditioning, issue. And some of that popped up again. And then he missed, 5 games with a wrist injury. So he hasn't been on the floor a lot. And when he has been, he's been good, but he set such a standard with his play that at times, even when he's dropping, like he had a 40-point game against the Phoenix Suns, and it was like, man, it wasn't an efficient night. It was a night where you felt like, okay, he could have been better, even with dropping 40 points in a game, against a team like that, in a game that they, shouldn't have lost on the road. But my point being is that if the Mavericks finish in the top 4 in the West, if they find a way to win, 52, 53, maybe 55 games in a difficult Western Conference, the numbers by the time that we get there should be good enough to have him very much in the conversation to win the MVP. Now, he's got to really get going, because we're now 22 games in, to the season. So these last 60 games, first of all, he's got to play enough to qualify for the award. But also, if he's got to play a majority of the rest of the season to really give him the kinds of numbers that will allow him to be considered, for the MVP. But yeah, he's got a good shot at it. But if he had got out to a better start, we would really be like, okay, number 1, number 2 MVP candidate. And now how does that build for the rest of the year? But he's got some work to do to really kind of get himself, in that conversation for legitimate MVP status this year.
Dallas is 14-8. He has played 16 of their 22 games so far. So he's missed 6. He can afford to miss 17 because he needs to play 65. And right. That's so basically you're playing with 11 more games. And right now, I think the odds, if you're looking at MVP odds, sort of reflect that, yeah, there's a chance like the games played could get him, just because like the NBA is the NBA, guys get hurt. He did play a little bit this summer. He didn't play in the Olympics because Slovenia didn't qualify. They got smacked up by Greece in Greece, and Greece ended up qualifying. But, Nikola Jokic is the favorite right now because like he's ridiculous. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander second right now. Tatum is third. Jason Tatum third, which I feel like it's very much a Boston is great thing. And I think
he's
also
trying to win the MVP in
I
some
think
ways.
I was gonna say I think because he didn't get Eastern Conference Finals MVP, didn't get Finals MVP, but most importantly the Olympic thing. I kind of liked Tatum as an MVP dark horse coming into the season because of that. And he is a really good player, but I mean I would say these guys are better than him, but he's on the best team. So what are you gonna do? Giannis is fourth, and well, I mean, can you really argue with that? And then Luka's fifth right there. Anthony Davis is sixth. I don't expect that to last. Anthony Edwards is seventh. Maybe he rises up a little bit, but there's some challenges there. I think with Luka Doncic, you nailed it. Like 55-ish wins, top 2-3 seed in the Western Conference. I feel like 55 can get you into the top two, given how stacked the conference is. And just the Luka numbers, that we're accustomed to. Like right now, he's at 29, 8-8. Not a big deal. And
those are typical Doncic numbers. Those are typical, I mean, last, like I say, he, averaged nearly 33, 34 points per game. So his scoring is down some, but the last two games that he's had, I mean, he had 36 against Portland on Sunday. He had 37 in the win against Memphis. And he's looked like the player that we are accustomed to seeing, much more fluid, much more healthy. In fact, he had 4 steals. That's how you know when Luka's kind of locked in on the defensive end. If he's getting his hands on the basketball, creating turnovers like he did last night, that's when you feel like, okay, he's a locked-in player. He's never going to be a great defender, but he's good enough to be a competent defender and to be able to play enough to where he's not getting beat and lost all the time, where it can't happen to him on the floor on occasion.
Also, because I just looked this up, the least amount of turnovers per 100 possessions in his career so far. Not turning the ball over a ton. 4.3 per 100 possessions. That's a full turnover fewer than last year. And he's had years, 3 of the 6 years he's played so far, above 6.
Yeah.
So far heading into this season. So
and that's by design, by the way. That's by design, because the amount of ball handles that they have on this team now, one of the things that Kid wanted to do this year was to take Luka off the ball a little bit, and one, for preservation, so that by the time we get to the playoffs, he can go do his thing and really just, go ham in the playoffs.
Right.
But two, there are other trusted ball handlers on this team that are capable of running this offense so that he doesn't have to have that much usage and load on him during the regular season. So that number really indicates that, by design, that it's working so far for him to be able to not have the ball necessarily in his hands all the time. Not to the point where you're, reducing the usage to a drastic rate, but just enough to say, hey, some other guys can handle some of this, to be able to make sure that he's where he needs to be by the time we get to the end of the regular season.